On May 16, 2005, the Groene family home sat quietly by Lake Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. Inside, Brenda Groene was tucking her kids into bed: 13-year-old Slade, 9-year-old Dylan, and 8-year-old Shasta. Her boyfriend, Mark Mackenzie, was kicked back in the living room watching TV. It was a normal Sunday night for what seemed like an average American family, but someone was lurking outside in the shadows. Joseph Edward Duncan had been watching the house for hours, memorizing their routines, waiting for the right moment to act. He was armed with zip ties, weapons, and 27 years of experience as a predator who'd been targeting kids since he was 15. Sometime that night, Duncan made his move. He slipped into the house while the family slept, turning their safe space into a nightmare in minutes. By morning, 3 members of the Groene family were dead, bludgeoned with a hammer in their own home. 2 kids were gone, vanished into the wilderness with a man whose evil had no limits. The discovery of the crime scene sparked one of Idaho's biggest manhunts ever. But what investigators didn't know was they were chasing a predator who'd spent decades honing his methods, leaving a trail of murdered kids across multiple states while the system failed to stop him. The Groene family massacre wasn't Duncan's first crime, nor would it be his last. It was the moment his decades of violence finally came into focus, exposing a predator whose reign of terror had gone on far longer than anyone could have imagined. Joseph Edward Duncan III was born on February 25, 1963, at Fort Bragg, North Carolina. He was the 4th of 5 kids in what looked like a typical military family. His dad, Joseph Duncan Jr., was in the U.S. Army, so the family moved constantly, a lifestyle that shaped Duncan's early years. The Duncan household was anything but steady, with his dad's military duties forcing frequent relocations. They bounced between states and even lived on bases overseas, leaving little chance for the kids to make lasting friends or feel rooted anywhere. Duncan's mom, Lillian May, was described as a controlling woman who ruled the household with an iron grip. The family dynamic was tense, caught between an absent dad and an overbearing mom. By the time Duncan was 12, his dad retired, and the family settled in Tacoma, Washington. But the cracks in the family were already deep. Things got worse as Duncan hit his teens. His parents' marriage fell apart, leading to a separation in 1979 and divorce in 1983. The already shaky family unit collapsed completely. Duncan's 3 older sisters bailed, leaving the toxic environment behind, and Duncan was stuck alone with his controlling mom. His younger brother eventually moved in with their dad, who'd remarried and started a new family. Duncan went to Lakes High School in Tacoma, but struggled with grades and fitting in. He never graduated, his school failures reflecting the mess of his personal life. Teachers and classmates later called him a loner who couldn't connect with others. It was during this chaotic time of family breakdown and isolation that Duncan started showing the warning signs that would define his life. In 1978, at just 15, he committed his first known sexual offense, a brutal crime that set the stage for decades of predatory behavior. The act was shocking in its violence and planning. Duncan approached a 9-year-old boy, threatened him with a gun, and raped him. This wasn't a spur-of-the-moment act of a confused kid. It was a calculated assault, showing a terrifying level of deviance. When Duncan got arrested the next year for stealing a car, more of his dark side came to light. Therapy at a juvenile detention facility, he dropped bombshells that floored mental health professionals. He admitted to tying up and assaulting 6 boys before his arrest, and estimated he'd raped 13 younger boys by age 16. These confessions revealed a teen who'd already become a skilled predator. His crimes weren't random. They targeted vulnerable kids, used weapons for control, and escalated from assault to sexual violence with chilling precision. In 1980, Duncan's crimes took a darker turn. He stole guns from a neighbor's house, a bold move that showed he understood the power firearms gave him over victims. Using those stolen weapons, he kidnapped a 14-year-old boy and sexually assaulted him at gunpoint. This crime marked a major escalation. He was targeting older kids and using more extreme violence. The court saw how serious his crimes were and sentenced him to 20 years in prison, a hefty punishment for a teenager. But Duncan didn't serve the full term. After 14 years, he was paroled in 1994, a decision that would prove deadly, costing innocent lives in the years that followed. Once out, Duncan moved to the Seattle area, where he was supposed to be under tight parole supervision. He had to register as a sex offender, keep stable housing, and check in with a parole officer. But the system failed to keep tabs on someone with his history of violence and predation. Duncan drifted between homes in Seattle, never staying put long enough to be easily tracked. This nomadic lifestyle, combined with lax oversight, let him keep preying without getting caught. In 1996, while still on parole, Duncan likely committed his first murders. On July 6, 1996, two young girls, 11-year-old Samieja White and her 9-year-old half-sister Carmen Cubias, vanished from the Crest Motel in Seattle, where they'd been staying with family. They were playing outside when they disappeared without a trace. A massive search kicked off with local police, the FBI, and hundreds of volunteers scouring the area for any sign of the girls. For nearly 2 years, their fate stayed a mystery. Then on February 10, 1998, hikers in Bothell, Washington, found skeletal remains in a remote wooded area. Dental records confirmed they were Samieja and Carmen, dead for over a year and a half. The state of the remains made it hard to pinpoint how they died, but evidence pointed to extreme violence. The case went cold, joining a string of unsolved child murders in the Pacific Northwest. What investigators didn't know then was that Duncan had beaten both girls to death, a method he'd use again later. He'd lured them from the motel, taken them to the remote spot, killed them, and dumped their bodies in the woods. The Seattle murders showed Duncan's crimes escalating from assault to murder, proving his violence had no boundaries. That he pulled this off while on parole exposed glaring flaws in the system, meant to protect the public from predators like him. His parole years gave him freedom to hunt victims across states. In April 1997, he went to California, where he claimed his next victim in a crime that showed his evolving tactics. On April 4, 1997, 10-year-old Anthony Martinez was playing with friends in his front yard in Beaumont, California, when a stranger approached. The man seemed friendly, asking the kids to help find his lost cat, a classic predator trick to get close to victims. When the kids refused, Duncan's demeanor flipped. He grabbed Martinez at knife point, showing the same weapon-based control he'd used before. Before the other kids could react, Duncan threw Martinez into his car and sped off. A 2-week search followed, with police, volunteers, and media working to find him. But on April 19, 1997, Martinez's body was found in Indio, California, naked and badly decomposed. Evidence showed he'd been sexually assaulted and bound with duct tape before being killed. Investigators found a partial fingerprint on the tape and made a composite sketch from the kids' descriptions. But the case went cold without a suspect. The Martinez murder showed Duncan's ability to operate across state lines and his growing confidence in dodging capture. He'd abducted, assaulted, and killed a kid in broad daylight, then hid the body to delay discovery. His freedom ended in 1997 when he was arrested in Missouri for a parole violation, a minor infraction that sent him back to prison for the rest of his original sentence. This likely stopped more crimes in the late 90s, but it also gave Duncan time to refine his methods and plan for his release. Prison records show he stayed manipulative, acting like a model prisoner while likely plotting his next moves. On July 14, 2000, Duncan was released with time off for good behavior, no longer on parole, giving him freedom to move without oversight. He settled in Fargo, North Dakota, possibly thinking a new place would help him avoid his past. But this wasn't about reform. It was a strategic move to a less populated area where he might not be recognized. For nearly 5 years, Duncan stayed under the radar. Investigators believe he may have committed more crimes during this time that remain unsolved. His ability to avoid arrest showed how he'd learned from past mistakes, becoming a more cunning predator. His freedom ended in July 2004 when he committed a crime that would eventually tie him to some of America's worst murders. On July 3, 2004, at a playground in Detroit Lakes, Minnesota, Duncan molested 2 young boys in broad daylight. The public setting showed his boldness and his knack for finding vulnerable kids without raising suspicion. The boys told adults who called police, and an investigation quickly pointed to Duncan, but the legal process dragged, and he stayed free for months. In March 2005, 8 months later, he was charged with the molestation. The delay would prove critical to the tragedy that followed. On April 5, 2005, Duncan faced a Becker County judge for his initial court appearance. The judge set bail at $15,000, a low amount given Duncan's history. A local businessman, unaware of Duncan's past, helped him post bail. This let Duncan skip town and disappear. On June 1, 2005, a federal warrant was issued for unlawful flight to avoid prosecution. But Duncan was already planning his most horrific crime. On the evening of May 15, 2005, he began watching a family home by Lake Coeur d'Alene, Idaho. The house belonged to Brenda Groene, a 40-year-old single mom, her kids Slade, Dylan, and Shasta, and her boyfriend Mark Mackenzie. The family lived a quiet life, with Brenda working to support her kids and Mark planning to marry her. Duncan studied their routines, learning when to strike, a sign of his calculated patience. In the early hours of May 16, 2005, Duncan acted. He entered the Groene home in the dark, armed and ready for violence. Shasta Groene later described the terrifying night. Her mom woke her and Dylan, whispering that someone was in the house. They went to the living room, where Duncan, wearing black gloves and holding a gun, took control. He bound Brenda, Mark, and Slade with zip ties, showing his preparation for handling multiple victims. Shasta and Dylan were taken outside to the lawn, waiting in fear as Duncan went back inside. They heard thumping sounds that would haunt Shasta forever. Slade briefly broke free and stumbled toward the door, likely trying to escape, but Duncan caught him and dragged him back. Using a hammer, Duncan beat Brenda, Mark, and Slade to death, each suffering multiple head injuries. The medical examiner later confirmed blunt trauma as the cause of death. After the murders, Duncan took Shasta and Dylan, loading them into a stolen red Jeep Cherokee with Missouri plates. As they drove off, he told the kids he'd killed their family with a hammer, details that would later help convict him. He drove them to remote spots, holding them captive for 47 days, repeatedly assaulting and torturing them while moving between campsites to avoid detection. The first was a makeshift camp in the Lolo National Forest near St. Regis, Montana, chosen for its isolation. There, Duncan subjected both kids to physical, sexual, and psychological abuse, using threats and manipulation to keep control. Shasta later said he bragged about killing her family with a hammer, using the details to terrorize her further. He also recorded some of his crimes on video, creating evidence that would later haunt everyone involved in his prosecution. After weeks of abuse, Duncan decided to kill 9-year-old Dylan Groene at the Montana campsite, with Shasta forced to witness it. He initially claimed Dylan's death was an accident, saying a shotgun in a plastic box fired when he was looking for beer, hitting Dylan in the stomach. But the truth was far worse. After the first shot wounded Dylan, Duncan chose to finish him off. He put the shotgun to Dylan's head and pulled the trigger, but it didn't fire. As Dylan begged for his life, Duncan reloaded and shot again, killing him instantly. Duncan told Shasta he killed Dylan to end his suffering, a lie meant to manipulate her. He disposed of Dylan's body at the campsite, where it stayed hidden for days, letting him keep Shasta captive as the search continued. Days after killing Dylan, Duncan nearly killed Shasta, giving her a sadistic choice between strangulation or being shot. She chose strangulation, hoping it might be less painful. Duncan tightened a rope around her neck until she started to pass out. But when she called him by his nickname, Jet, and begged him to stop, he let go for reasons no one fully understands. Instead of killing her, he asked if she wanted to meet his mom. When she said yes, he decided to head back toward civilization, a choice that led to his capture. On July 2, 2005, Duncan took Shasta to a Denny's in Coeur d'Alene, Idaho, around 2 a.m. His decision to go to a public place suggested he might have been unraveling or ready to give up. The staff recognized Shasta from media coverage, and the waitress described the moment as terrifying, but kept her cool. The staff strategically positioned themselves to keep Duncan from leaving, while someone called the police. Within minutes, police surrounded the Denny's and arrested Duncan without a fight, ending 47 days of terror for Shasta. She confirmed her identity and was taken to Kootenai Medical Center. later reuniting with her dad, who'd spent nearly 7 weeks not knowing if she was alive. Duncan's arrest launched a massive investigation tying him to unsolved murders across states. The FBI reviewed cold cases for patterns matching Duncan's methods. On July 4, 2005, investigators found Dylan's remains at the Montana campsite, confirmed by DNA testing at the FBI lab in Quantico. The crime scene backed Shasta's accounts of the abuse and murder, showing Duncan's careful planning in choosing isolated spots and controlling victims. Investigators in California and Washington revisited cold cases, noticing similarities to Duncan's crimes. In the Anthony Martinez case, Duncan's appearance matched the 1997 composite sketch, and his vehicle resembled the one described by witnesses. Fingerprint on duct tape from Martinez's body matched Duncan's, linking him to the murder. On July 19, 2005, Duncan confessed to Martinez's killing, calling it revenge against society for his parole violation. He also admitted to the 1996 murders of Samiejo White and Carmen Cubias, giving details only the killer would know, bringing closure to families after nearly a decade. Duncan faced trials in Idaho, federal court, and California. In Idaho, he was charged with 3 counts of first-degree murder and 3 counts of kidnapping for the Groene family crimes. Prosecutors aimed for the death penalty, but on October 16, 2006, Duncan pleaded guilty to all state charges, getting 3 life sentences without parole for kidnapping. Murder sentencing was delayed pending his federal trial. The federal case covered the cross-state kidnapping of Shasta and Dylan and Dylan's murder. On January 18, 2007, Duncan was indicted on 10 counts, including kidnapping and murder, with the death penalty on the table. He pleaded guilty to all charges on December 3, 2007, then chose to represent himself, raising concerns about his mental state, though he was deemed competent. On August 27, 2008, a jury gave him 3 death sentences for Dylan's murder and related crimes, plus 3 life sentences for kidnapping Shasta and abusing both kids. The jury saw a horrific 33-minute video of Duncan torturing Dylan, with Duncan shouting, "The devil is here, boy," the devil himself. The devil likes to watch children suffer and cry. In California, Duncan was charged with Martinez's murder, pleading guilty on March 15, 2011, and getting 2 life sentences without parole as part of a plea deal. Before his arrest, Duncan ran a website called The Fifth Nail, referencing a Christian legend about a hidden nail from Jesus' crucifixion. He denied being a pedophile and claimed childhood abuse. In prison, he continued posting via a blog. Joseph E. Duncan III returns to the web from federal death row, run by someone posting his letters. The blog showed his lack of remorse and efforts to manipulate public perception. Duncan was held at USP Terre Haute, Indiana, on death row, describing his isolated life there. In July 2019, when federal executions resumed, he said he preferred lethal injection over dying naturally. In 2016, Shasta, then 19, started a petition called Slade and Dylan's Law, pushing for life sentences without parole for violent sex offenders after 1 strike. It gained over 51,000 signatures, showing her strength and commitment to protecting kids. In October 2020, Duncan was diagnosed with glioblastoma, an aggressive brain cancer with 6 to 12 months to live. He refused treatment and died on March 28, 2021, at 58, ending one of America's worst criminal careers. His death meant his death sentences were never carried out, but it ensured he'd never harm again. His body was cremated, closing a chapter of immense pain for victims' families across decades and states. The case exposed flaws in parole and supervision systems, showing how Duncan slipped through for years. It also highlighted the need for better law enforcement coordination and the power of public action, like the Denny's staff who saved Shasta. Shasta's courage in testifying and advocating for change brought some justice and may prevent future tragedies. Duncan's case solved several cold cases but left others unsolved, meaning some families may never get answers. It's a stark reminder of the evil out there and the need to protect kids, as well as the tireless work of law enforcement facing unimaginable horrors. Joseph Edward Duncan III wasn't just a serial killer. He was a predator, who shattered countless lives over decades. His death ended his terror, but the scars he left remain.